begin my talk with this. Cats are very smart creatures. When they detect hostility in their surrounding environment, they raise their haunches and they get defensive. They recognize their protectors and are loyal to them. They somehow scout out the safest spots to sleep at night, untouched by predators. But given the connotations and various meanings we've attached to the word, can they be considered intelligent? By the Oxford Dictionary, the word intelligent is defined as having or showing intelligence. The word smart is defined as having or showing quick-witted intelligence. The difference, then, lies in the quick-witted. Wit is a quintessential part of a person's thinking and has evolved over time to accommodate the new and worldly situations we experience. With increasing amounts of wit passed from generation to generation, we as humans have evolved into creatures with a complex thought structure. As is with all qualities, this isn't evenly distributed amongst everybody, but instead distributed to a large section of people, and the rest are left to play catch-up. These instincts may be genetically acquired for some, but for others, it's developed over the course of the impressionable childhood, namely ages 5 to 12. The difference between these smart children and the naive ones comes in the freedoms, or the lack thereof, that were allowed to them. Some people call this quicker maturity. I call it unnatural. Let's go back to the cat. If I take a kitten from a street cat family, and I take a kitten from a domestic cat family, and switch them around, like Prince and the Pauper style, to lead very different lives than what they would have led, their smart qualities would also, therefore, be switched around accordingly. The street cat would be brought up in an affectionate and pampering environment, whereas the domestic cat would develop the survival smarts required to forge its life on the streets. Survival smarts like self-defense and killing for food. Survival smarts it would have never needed otherwise. I was never exposed to this harsh reality of smartness. My old elementary school was a wonderful haven of friendship and sharing the building blocks, while others had to snatch the blocks they wanted, forcibly and violently, to build their castle with. As a child and pre-teenager, I was never allowed to watch TV shows that contained the words stupid and idiot in them, so I was stuck watching Bob the Builder for 12 years. Other children of my age were moving on from the Disney Channel to more mature shows like 2.5 Men. While I was busy thinking that the world was full of good and honest people and that deceit and lies didn't exist, my same age peers already knew how to handle, control, and control them, so in their favor. These external factors, for the most of us, affect and therefore make up who we are. If you imagine your personality to be a large block of soft putty, over time, these factors step in and punch it into shape. Unfortunately, this isn't exactly at our discretion. It's decided by the environment surrounding us. When I arrived in India at age 7, the people I met and had to work with were extremely alien to me. I labeled them all as mean, but they laughed and jeered at my simple-mindedness and my innocence. They pushed and shoved to get their way, and they were applauded for doing so. And anybody who didn't comply was immediately stomped on. I, on the other hand, was bullied for my trusting nature and my innocence, and I was taken advantage of to the point where I started to get in trouble. Somehow, in these troubling situations, I was in the wrong, because I trusted people and I believed they would change. I blindly followed people, and I was much too gullible. Conversely, these smarter and these better kids were all right, because they knew how to handle people and they knew how to get work done, no matter what the cost or consequence was. My parents always told me to smarten up, so the world wouldn't eat me alive. They told me that these children, they never told me to remain the way I was. And they never told me that these children were just growing up quicker, which never necessarily equated to better. They told me that these children would be the ones to lead the world someday, and that because they knew how to run the world, they knew they had the smarts required to run it. And that would leave me dejected, because I clearly was not that type of person. I was too accommodating, too believing, and too gullible. My question is, why are the trusting ones the weaklings? The people of our world run a race to get to the top of the ladder, and in doing so, any means they use to get there are okay. The front runners are the ones who are ruthless and cunning, the ones who know the ways of the world, while the bench warmers are the innocent ones, the foolish ones. This is because our society mandates a network of independent citizens who are capable of handling themselves and their assets in accordance with fast society and an even faster rate of change. Because of this, those with more simple communal mindsets are much more liable to ridicule. The concept of community goes a long way back. 14,000 years ago, humans formed the first communities. 8,000 years following that, they've started to form communities that resemble our modern society. However, back then, each person had no reservations against completely and wholly trusting the entire neighborhood. Crime was non-existent. Humans coexisted peacefully. And to be honest, everyone carried the same calm, sociable demeanor. This is how the first naive mindsets formed, when everybody was mutually respectful and trusting of each other, and there was no race to success. These same mindsets carried forward through time, but with each passing age and era, people began to become a little more deceitful, a little more criminal, a little more hidden. They also became a little more geared towards one-upping everybody else. However, there were and are a group of people who were simply not brought up in the same environment and who simply wore the personalities of Neolithic times, the simple personalities. These were the people who became increasingly stampeded over as time passed and who eventually became the stragglers in the great human race. But why are they the stragglers? As is with any race, we all run for a reason. In this case, the goal is success. But the motivation that fuels our run to get there exists in the form of two ideas: greed and materialism. Greed stems from the need to want something more, to make our current condition even more satisfactory, to better what's already the best. We want the latest iPhone, the fastest Wi-Fi, the last cookie. Greed is ingrained in all of us, but for some more than others. We are all greedy to become the best, to reach the top of that ladder, to look down upon others and have others look up to us. But unfortunately, that precarious ledge can't fit all of us. So the race elongates and progresses in a never-ending continuum. Some people may argue that greed is the mother of innovation, that the refusal to stick to our current predicament is what helped and is helping our society develop. But those who are actually pretty happy with what they have are labeled and mocked. They're the boring ones, the grandmothers and grandfathers of our little communities, the ones with too simple a mindset and the ones who will never prosper. This kind of naive thought property is a part of what we shall refer to from now on as the naive mind. Materialism, on the other hand, is the farm in which greed is harvested. The desire to want things, not ideas. Again, those who want just ideas are whimsical, simple. Those who want just things, or a combination of both, are automatically smart. These two together create a toxic mix for personality, something that will contaminate it and turn it into a mainstream machine so that all it does is produce and develop and think of nothing but how much better the next upgrade to our lives is going to be. In a future-oriented developing context, this is acceptable. However, the misfits don't seem to think so. People who possess the naive mind appreciate what they have and stop to enjoy it rather than moving on to the next big thing. The naive mind is, contrary to popular belief, a complex thing as well. They specialize not in how to outperform the next person, but in seeing how everybody will be able to do well at once. They don't think of people as good and bad. They think of people as creatures capable of great and quick change. They aren't obsessed with developing as everybody else, because they think what they have is already the best. They trust people because they hope that it will be upheld, and they aren't deceitful because they find no need to be. Unfortunately, despite their peace-loving mindset, these people are looked down upon. They're looked down upon for the same reason that historical colonists look down upon all those of other races. They are looked down upon because they are not, and they are not doing, what everybody else is. Everybody expects them to change, to become smarter, better, to become just like the people running in front of them. People don't seem to think that success and trust can go hand in hand, and that it's one or the other. That people must be mean and cunning to make their way and pave their path, and that if one trusts people, they'll lose what they have. Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street was idolized for his amazing sales pitch and his witty tactics to get back on top of Wall Street. But Ariel in The Little Mermaid was criticized for being too naive and giving up her voice just to be with the man of her dreams. But what about Tiana, the Disney princess who both got her man and opened her own cafe, successfully? What about normal, boring Arthur Dent, who hitchhiked across the galaxy with an exoplanetary citizen? People tend to overlook such characters because they don't fit into the norm of stereotyped and hyped successful human beings. In the mind of society's herd-like binary thinking about success, such characters do not belong because of its inability to recognize and reward a spectrum of different personalities. To be simple-minded and trusting, yet successful, is completely doable and practical. Sounds naive, doesn't it? When I say naive, when I use the words I've been using this entire talk so far. Naivety, along with its extreme for being a foolish personality feature, also has developed negative connotations as time passed because of this reputation. What's more is that now several other distinct personality features, as soon as they're thought to be undesirable in a person, are quick to be grouped under naivety. And then another question arises. Who classifies these? And what gives them the right to do so? The answer? Unfortunately, the binary society. And frankly, they have no right. Like I mentioned earlier, greed is ingrained in all of us. Included in that is the greed to own or dominate other people, to rule over them. Even though this greed is as strong as it was during the slave trade era, it's transformed into subtler forms due to changing legal and ethical considerations. It's what makes us want to classify, to segregate. And so, people categorize others into personality groups and then decide whether they're desirable or not. The way society segregates their smart majority from their naive minority is exactly the reason why the latter is forced, not in a direct, but in a very subtle yet demanding way, to change who they are and their value systems just to match up with the rest of the population. This is a late, artificial process of the unnaturalization I spoke about earlier. Society hounds them to stop being so innocent, so trusting, and in turn, forcibly changes the way these people view the world. From their perspective of it being an idealistic, dreamy place, which it should be, to it being a cruel dog-eat-dog arena. I was forced to change. No one ever came up to me and told me directly, to my face, that I needed to do it. But the smart kids harshly discriminated against me, which drove me to the edges of depression and isolation. Having an identity crisis and deciding that I needed to change, in the beginning of high school, I did, drastically and artificially. I began to speak with no filter, hoping that my crude humor could get people to like me. I wanted to appear intelligent like the rest of my classmates, so I looked up an area of science that mildly interested me, and I began studying it. I wanted to be seen as someone who could do everything, someone who was quirky and interesting. So I took up guitar, basketball, and the enormous task of teaching myself two new languages and a new genre of dance, all for the purpose of being forced by society to hide my naivety, my dreams, my values, just to appear like everybody else. Of course, I don't regret it. What started out as a sort of project to appear normal had me discovering some of my biggest interests, passions, and affinities. I now play grade 5 guitar. I tap dance proficiently. I see a very promising future for myself in the field of astrophysics and astronomy. And I now fluently communicate in 7 languages, 1 from each continent. However, everybody's case is not like mine. In fact, they very well may be quite the opposite. The initial depression felt at being isolated and being discriminated against could spiral into something worse. Behind the facade naive people who've been forced to change put on is misery at not being able to be who they truly are all the time. They have their artificial personalities that resemble everybody else's, but trapped within them are the cores and values that make up their very being. These people tend to develop home and work personalities, which, apart from being disorienting and a very sad prospect, reminds me of what we do with telephones. We have home telephones and we have work telephones. But what society needs, in its frenzied obsession of constant upgradation, is a mobile number. A mobile personality, a mix of both, the home and the professional. I believe that ambiguity of personality can be a huge first step forward into filling this chasm. Imagine this. If we, in our current situation where we are extremely reserved with the trust we put into people, extend this limited resource to a few other people, and collaborate with still others on brilliant ideas for upgrades to the great human race, then how much better could these upgrades be? The amount of differing perspectives that goes into a development determines its eligibility for a more widespread and diverse audience. We can all run the race with a little more motivation, and in a true success-oriented fashion, these developments would profit us better. The developers would obtain a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction at having been able to provide these upgrades. All of this just for a little seed capital of a little trust. Now, if we take this little trust and begin to incorporate it into various other aspects of our lives, I can only imagine how much faster and how much better our world will develop for individuals as a close society. Being sociable creatures, humans are always bound to come back to their inbred core value, community. And I can think of no other way to fantastically accomplish that. To paraphrase and add on to an anonymous quote, learn a bit, live a speck, love a tad, but trust a little more. Thank you.